Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was March 4th, 1397. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt Cara Compagnona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Before we get into the sourcing and content of the document itself, I just want to point out that there's something interesting about the materiality of today's document. Well, it appears on folio 1V of Register 2053, meaning that it's on the back of the very first piece of paper containing letters in this register. So what I'm going to do for today's webpage is I'm going to upload everything that has been scanned and made available on Pares for the first pages of Register 2053. And what you'll be able to see is the cover page that the archivists at the Archive of the Crown of Aragon have written up for this register. And then after that, you're going to see the initial pages, like the cover page, there's a blank page, and then we get to the first page of recorded letters. And that would be folio 1R, which is actually number, hold on a sec. Let's see. Folio 1R is actually the fourth image in the series on Pares for this register. And the third image is a blank page. It's the verso of what we see as the title. The title page is kind of cool. It has sort of larger, thicker letters written in the late 14th century, probably at the beginning of when the secret seal letters were being gathered. So what's interesting is that, we've been looking at a lot of letters from Violant in the register called Varia. And it seems like at the end of February of 1387 is when the chancery is kind of really established its different categories of registers for Violant. And so the very first letters that appear in this register, which is titled Curia Sigilli Secretum Regina Iolantis, so the secret seal of the court of Queen Violant. The first letter in there is dated February 27th, and then the second letter is actually hard to find a date, to be honest. I'm looking at it right now on folio 1R, and there's this thing in the middle that I can't, there's really no date on that. Not quite sure what's going on there. And then at the very bottom of 1R, there's two lines. Can't quite figure out why they wanted to squeeze two lines. They do that sometimes. I've seen that a couple times. Well, there's two lines of the letter that ends on the first half of Folio 1V, which is dated the 25th of February. And then there's the letter that's our focus for today, for March 4th. And then on the page following, which I'm not going to be posting onto the website, there's the 5th of March. Actually, I think we are going to be looking at that one tomorrow. And then the 20th of March on the same page. So that's kind of crazy that we jump from the 5th to the 20th. It's a little weird. Well, kind of par for the course, as you've noticed by this point. There's a lot of jumping around of the dates. Just for kicks, I'm going to look at the next page following, which we have actually dated, looks like, oh gosh, what is it even dated? Well, another one for the 20th at the bottom, and then there's one at the top of this, I guess would be Folio 2V, and it doesn't seem to be dated. Goodness gracious. Well, we'll just have to figure that out, or maybe not. So, the very beginning of the register, let's go back to that for a second, and just want to point out that in addition to the very large letters that are the title of the folio, there's a message at the top which includes the name Bartolomeo Sirvent. So I think that Bartolomeo Sirvent was pretty much like the head of the scribes who contributed to this particular register, and he was one of the most frequent scribes for Violant in this period, and actually stretching years into her reign. And we see that it was begun, the register was begun on the 17th of February of 1387, and that's pretty much all that says. All right. There's a couple other things on this page. There's the date range. That is not written in the handwriting of the late 14th century. So the stuff that is on the page sort of in its center below the title, and even the title might not be actually from the 14th century. That I think it's actually much later now that I'm looking at it, because if you compare the handwriting at the top, where we have the statement from Bartolomeo Sirvent, to the handwriting that appears in the center of the page that is clearly not 14th century Gothic secretarial hand, the thick print, large letter print, I think was added closer to the time of the message in the center that I'm going to explain in just a sec. So yeah, I think really when this register was set into storage at the end of its, so 1390 is the end of its range, I think that there was nothing written on the front of this page other than the 3 lines at the very top. And then it was much later, something like at least the 18th century, when, and I'm guessing more like the 19th century, when this other writing was added onto this page. Now, the 3 categories that are listed on the center, estancia, orde, calèche, they each have numbers after them, 6, 6, and I believe that's a 93? Not sure. These are categories of storage, and I believe that calèche is a box, and so this is indicating that it's on shelf 6, its order number is 6, and then I think it means box 93. So these were stored not vertically like what we're used to seeing in bound volumes on a library or archive shelf. I think I'm correct in my understanding and memory of what I read about the archive of the Crown of Aragon, that they were in boxes. And that helps to explain some of the insect and worm damage, that these worms were not traveling horizontally through multiple registers. They were traveling vertically, like maybe from the top down. And so that doesn't quite explain how the patterns might not match up. But yeah, I think it would be really interesting in the future, once all of these images can be uploaded into some kind of powerful image processing program, that the holes can be matched up so that it can be determined what registers were stored on top of what other registers for the centuries that they might have been in there undisturbed. So eventually the Archive of the Crown of Aragon numbered the registers differently, and they came up with a scheme that put them in rough chronological order, so that when we look at registers from the reign of Per the Ceremonious, we're looking at registers that generally are going to start with something like a 1, so like the 1000s. And then when we are looking at registers from starting with Joan's reign, we're looking at registers that are in the late teens, something like, the 1900s series. And then for Violant, several of her registers are in the 2000s. So like this one is 2053. There's another one that a lot of scholars have worked with, 2037. So that gives you a little bit of a window into the materiality of these registers and these documents that we look at, and then also a little bit into the history of the Archive of the Crown of Aragon, which I think is really fascinating. All right, now let's get to the document. This is written by Violant. The scribe is Bartolomeo Sirvent. We have a nice clear addressee line below the text block of the letter, Visconti de Roda. So this is Ramon de Perellos, and that is somebody that's come up in the podcast before. He's one of the most experienced and skilled diplomats. It's possible that he is one of the most trusted counselors for Violant. She might have known him back in France when she first found out that she was going to be marrying Joan and moving to the Crown of Aragon. So here we have a letter which it's really hard to judge how urgent this is, because there's language in it that seems extremely urgent. But is it really like emergency level urgent? Or is it just, clarifying? Because what the letter says is that Violant wants Ramon de Perellos, Viscount de Roda, to return to Barcelona. And the problem is that there's been other communication sent to him that might have been giving him some other instructions. So, okay, where is it? It's on line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On line 6. Qual se val lettres o manaments contraris. So, there's been other correspondence that has been sent to Ramon de Perellos with other instructions, and now Violant is saying you have to ignore all those, and there's other, and all the other things you're doing in Avignon, and the line about Avignon is the next line below, And so you have to come back. You have to come to Barcelona, and then actually, like, without delay. So sens tardare, no delay, and he's supposed to come back, it seems, with the ambassadors, and then all of this is then couched in this introduction in which she says, okay, I've received your letters. This is line 1. I've received your letters. And then she says she's received ambassadors from the King of France. And so what has changed? This is something that is quite mysterious to me. So she's received information from the King of France, and then that is implicitly the reason that she wants Ramon de Perellos to come back right away from Avignon. And what's really weird about this is just a few days earlier, she dispatched Luchino Scarampi to Avignon. So is this on some kind of similar topic? Like, is this about the marriage negotiations, and Scarampi is replacing Ramon de Perellos? It doesn't really seem like it, but it is kind of weird how close in time these are. And I guess Violant in the letter is saying that it has to do with what she's heard from the King of France. And I guess that is not related to what she has instructed Scarampi to do about the marriage negotiations. So maybe there's like another track that's running here, like there's some other issue that they're trying to get resolved, that Joanne and Violant are trying to get resolved, and the King of France is working with them on it. Or maybe the number one mission in Avignon right now are these marriage negotiations, and it is connected. There's just no way to know because they keep these letters just so general. But there is urgency. The question is, what's the level of urgency? And I do have to say that I've never seen quite this level of like, get your butt back here right away. It seems like there might be even like some kind of note of panic in here, but I'm just not sure. It could simply be written that way because Violant knows that other instructions have been sent by herself or by Joanne to Ramon de Perellos, and he might be confused if he doesn't have this like ultra clear, very repetitive message about don't delay, ignore all the other instructions, get back to Barcelona. Hopefully we are going to figure out why and what this is all about, and if there really was a kind of emergency level of urgency to this summons. All right, one last thing to mention. My process with Gemini and Claude is going strong, and so I'll add the reports from those AI chatbots into the AI usage statement on the webpage for this episode. It's interesting to kind of see how it's working and try to track what is useful about it. I think that this did go a lot faster with their assistance, and that it's kind of a scaffold for me as I'm getting a better grasp of some of the tone and some of the vocab of medieval Catalan and medieval Latin. I will say that I went to my old medieval Catalan glossary in order to get a definition for the word leixats in the fourth line toward the end, Lexats, in the English letter pronunciation, because that looked I was wondering, is that about laws? It's not. It just means to leave in medieval Catalan, but that's not in modern Catalan. I'm not quite sure what the equivalent is in modern Catalan. Okay, so, that phrase, you might just be curious to know, les chats de tot. Okay, I'm leaving everything. All right, cool. So still using some non-AI resources as I am getting stronger at the reading of the script and also the translation. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I have done my job. Because remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.